This session is Tapestry for teachers and early years managers. In some ways, that's quite a broad remit because we're going from schools to preschools to nurseries. But I hope that what we cover in here is of use to you, and I was pleased to hear that people are looking for a sort of refresher of what's in Tapestry and how to tackle things in the new context of the new development matters, or whatever new frameworks and changes you are making. And I'm sure it's a process of continual change in some ways. No one seems to have the absolute answer, and lots of settings are sort of rediscovering what is going to work best for them in the new context. So just to explain to you again very briefly that this is training brought to you as part of the DfE's EdTech Demonstrator Programme, and as an organisation we can offer your school guidance in all sorts of areas of technology. I am not someone with years and years of experience teaching in the early years. My teaching tends to be up at Key Stage 2. However, I was very much attracted to Tapestry, to understanding it, and to helping fellow teachers use it in a better way. And really, my motivation behind this is about saving people time, as I'm sure I'm sure you all have that need, juggling everything that you do in your settings. Let me just let Richard in there. So 4 points here just to blast through, really. We can talk about why we're using Tapestry till we're blue in the face, really. But if you think back to days of printed journals, that sort of halfway house between a digital camera and printing things out and writing things in books, there's a key win there. And of course, if used intelligently, the parental engagement side of Tapestry can be really quite fantastic for people keeping in touch, and for your setting to communicate to all of those different people in quite an efficient, effective way. But as number 2 says, you're going to, it's about picking and choosing what works for your setting. And I'm going to go over, the basic differences between the ways that you can access Tapestry, talk a little bit about devices as well. There's a slide on here that anyone who's thinking about devices might want to consider. And then moving on to think about observations and the flags element, which is now in Tapestry and flagged up as part of your toolkit for working with observations that you do make. And moving on to point 4 about areas of concern, screen, which is key part of Tapestry's tracking, if you want to call it that. And I'll give you an overview of how that works and how it might work in your setting, as well as talking about reflections, which is something that Tapestry has built in. It's been there for a while. In the past, when reflections were there in the more data-driven times, I always felt they were really a step too far, and people would never have the time to do them. But now the data side of things has been stripped back so much, it feels like the reflections element could work quite well for settings. So just really a pointer about the different ways in which we access Tapestry, and I guess for you to think about when is it best to access Tapestry in different ways. The app sits on mobile devices, iPads or phones possibly, whatever it is you're using in your setting, and gives you that quick way to upload and to adjust observations in basic terms. All of the meaty stuff tends to be accessed through a web browser, and I will share through my browser on here a bit later. However, you can of course access through a web browser through an iPad device, particularly if it's got a large screen. You may find that that's an okay way to access it. So it's always worth remembering that you can get in there through a web browser on whatever you're using. And the camera app, whether that's on Android or Apple device, remains the quickest way to get those photos of children in context, and the quickest way to grab those pictures and get the device put away as quickly as possible as well, because there's huge emphasis on settings, not letting these observation journals take over the task of what's going on in the day, which I fully endorse that. You might question how on earth you get everything done in a day anyway. But using the camera app has some key advantages. And if you are someone who uses video, the camera app can be really useful because it allows you to chop those videos down quickly to what is useful. Again, any of this, ask me questions a bit later about it if that's something you want to bring up and talk about. Now, there's a slide here. I'm not going to go on about it too much, but I think it is really worth considering the different options that are there for device use in settings. It's really unfortunate the way that the mini-sized iPads have ended up being the really expensive ones for Apple. They're obviously not thinking about Tapestry users when they produce these devices. And the larger ones, which are less powerful, they're the cheaper price, and yet carrying around a big device within nursery just sometimes doesn't seem like the right thing to be doing. You can use a combination of different devices, of course, in your setting. But if you are looking at investing in something that's going to work for your setting, think carefully about what's out there and what might work. There are some settings that are buying phones and just activating them and using them as small devices, and you can get a refurbished Apple phone, if that's the way you want to go, for really quite a reasonable price, and you might think that's a better thing to have for these members of staff than another item. Again, if you want to talk about that further, ask me questions at the end. And on the right there, just talking about Dictation, which is built into mobile devices now, and it's sometimes something that we ignore because we feel like idiots doing it, or we don't feel like we're in the right circumstance. But there are lots of settings that use the dictation function at various points and find that it saves them a lot of time, because speaking into a device and having your voice turn into text can clearly be quite a quick way to get your voice changed into text. So it's always something to think about. That slide is in some ways less relevant these days. However, feedback I've had says actually it's still best to go for this autumn, spring, summer setup, because splitting into 6 just spreads it too thinly really over the time. And if you're looking at observations over a certain time period, it tends to be better to have these larger blocks. If you're working to some kind of rough ratios or covering all the children in a certain block of time, having it in this sort of setup is worthwhile. If you don't know how to change that on your account, I'm very happy to again show you a bit later. And there's a slide here on the flags explaining what they are, where they've come from, and as it says on there, they're a stripped back way to tag strands of development matters, or birth to 5, or birth G to 5, as it says there, and it shouldn't. So it's a case of you tap a button to say this OBS is to do with maths, or this OBS is to do with communication and language, or whatever it might be. If you want the more detailed flags like they have in birth to 5, these sub levels, you can do that. But for most settings, I think even if you weren't using birth to 5, you'll probably find just having the main headings is just a good way, a simple way to kind of categorize your observations. And so what's the point of this? Well, the point is that you can look back on observations you can look back on a child's observations in maths, let's say, at the end of a year, and get Tapestry to pull out those observations for you, so that you can have a look at them and reflect on where that child is and where that child's come from. As you know, children at this age, they change at an incredible rate, and actually looking back to the beginning of years is sometimes, you know, in some ways impossible without kind of reminding yourself with pictures of what was actually going on. So at this point, let me just go to the next slide. There is something about reflections, but we'll come on to talking about that in just a moment. I am going to really quickly now go into the app version of Tapestry and share over to there. Just so that quick reminder, really. Now, I apologize for some of the observations in here. They're not especially realistic. We've got a block building one, bits and pieces. I'm going to just make a quick observation in here in a traditional way, typing on the keyboard, and go through these options a little bit. Of course, you have the option to take pictures or record video in the app, but most people, a lot of practitioners, find actually they've taken the photos before, and it's at this point they're pulling in pictures. So let's pull in these three. You'll see on here that they've got dates on them, which can be really nice for when you're going back over, you know, things that have happened, and you're piecing it together into some observations for a child. So we've queued up some pictures there of this block building activity, and if I scroll down, you'll see here's the flags section there, flags, and you need to have enabled that. I will go on and just show you in the web version where this stuff is if you haven't explored it already. But if I go down to flags, you'll see in here you can have flags for all sorts of things. The one that you are most likely to definitely be using is this one, EYFS 2021, and they've called it that to cover development matters and people who are doing birth to 5. Okay, but you'll see in here we can tag some of these flags. So I'm going to say maths with block building here, and I'm going to imagine that we've got some children working on this activity with blocks. There's a maths element, there's a communication and language element. You can put in, you know, whatever flags are relevant to your task, and you'll see when I press done, they're there. You can see down the bottom there, this used to not be there, but you've got an option to quickly choose the date. So if you're going back over lots of observations and, you know, bolstering up your observations like you might be doing, catching up on what has happened over previous weeks, you can choose a different date for them. Whether that matters for you in reality, I'm not sure. Probably it's good to have the date within your time block. So, you know, if it happened in the autumn term, probably better for it to be a date in the autumn term rather than a date in the spring term, because when you go to look back, it won't find them. And the notes section, of course, there's no right or wrong over what should be written in the notes, the quantity written in the notes, or indeed whether you've really got any notes in there at all. I would suggest that having a degree of flexibility about, you know, whether it's appropriate to have long extended notes or not is the way to go with this. It might be that a teacher writes more extended notes and TA doesn't do that. Again, no set rules, but just think about the purpose of it and what it communicates to your parents, and also whether it's something that's useful to look back on. So just to demo that dictation feature, of course I can be typing on here, but if I press the dictate button, which you'll see is down there next to the space bar, I tap it, I can speak into the device, and then tap again to stop. So let's have a go. These children were discussing the colours of the blocks while building their own towers, full stop. There was a great discussion about primary colours and lots of colourful language used as well, exclamation mark. Okay, so I can get text into Tapestry really quickly with dictation feature. If you were sitting at home on the sofa and you had some quietness around you and you were catching up on some observations, I'd thoroughly recommend it as a great way to proceed with that. But also if you've got teaching assistants, support staff who aren't particularly confident spellers, or their use of grammar is sometimes a little bit off, maybe don't put them through the process of having to sit there and tap and spend all this time. Just get them to say a couple of sentences, and you can always edit and improve what's there, and just make it work for you and the skills that different people have. I don't think anyone especially likes typing onto a touch screen. Maybe the younger generation of humans are a bit more used to it, but certainly well, anyway, that's enough going on about that. The only thing I would say is just consider how people are using devices. If if the device feels like a hindrance for them, then maybe there's something that could be done to improve life. Right, so we've got pictures in there. We've chosen a couple of flags. We haven't chosen children. So in this case, I'm going to choose some of these children, but you can see down the bottom where it says group treetops that I've actually filtered this list. So if I clear filters there, it will give me all of the children. Now there's only about 10 in this account. But if you're a setting that's got lots and lots of children, and there are children in there that you never personally encounter, then you can filter here to whatever group it might be, and some of those groups you'd have to set up within Tapestry. That can be really useful. It will remember your filtering from before. So if you filtered to the children that you work with, every time it will show you the ones who you're working with. And I'm going to choose 3 to done. You can see that those children appear on there. Those children are getting a bit old now. I'm going to have to change their dates of birth. And in this context, I've made a group observation, and certainly group observations, if used wisely, can be a really, really effective way to get an observation out there to different sets of parents. They can be a really effective way to communicate something to a whole gang of children's parents about something that happened at school that day. So group observation is to be used, but used carefully, because of course what you write in the notes will be shared with them. So lots of settings understand that you probably will not refer to children by their first names if you're doing a group observation. You can, within the web version, split your group observation into separate observations, one for each child, which would be fine. And so you've got a method there where you can split it apart, and then you could write different notes for a different child. And of course, with them being single, then the different relatives wouldn't see each of those observations, if that makes sense. So group obs and splitting later is a technique that lots of practitioners use to make that work for them. Just a word about photos. He says, looking at my photos and thinking, well, they're not that great photos. If adults get really snap happy with their photos, you can end up with this mass of photos. It's quite hard to decipher when you look back over them. So I think it's always worth saying to people, you know, go for quality rather than quantity of photo. If children are involved in a process, something new happens, something changes, there's a beginning, middle and end, or however it might be, then, you know, try to capture those key moments of whatever brilliant thing is going on. But don't just fill up your iPad with absolutely tons of photos, because you will find it harder to look back and pick photos from those activities. That's all I say about that. I'm going to tap upload in the top right there, and it's going to go in. You'll see it's not in the journal. You'll see that there's a button there to add it to the journal down in the middle, just off to the left. I can add it to the journal, which means the relatives will then see it. I can remove it from the journal, which means the relatives then cannot see it. So you've got that nice safety net there to say, okay, this observation is half finished, almost finished, but not quite finished. I've created it. I'm a teaching assistant. The teacher is going to look through and add them to the journal when they're happy with them. So it's a really nice situation for kind of having a bit of a safety net there. And it also, you know, it works as a, okay, that's finished. I don't need to pay much attention to that one anymore. It's going in the journal. I'm done with that, and I'm moving on. So you'll see from this rundown of observations on the left, at the bottom it says no filters, and again, if I tap there, I can choose for them to be just not in the journal. All right, and then I click done. These are just, or should be, observations, and actually there's memos in there as well that are not in the journal. So if you're looking back, trying to find half finished stuff that you never quite got sorted and finished, go to the bottom left here, filter your observations to just not in the journal, and it will pull out things from the past that you may have forgotten just before Christmas, before your brain fully shut down. And you know, it's a good way to check back and make sure you haven't missed any golden moments that might be lurking in there. Okay, so always worth remembering these filtering bits and pieces from the bottom left there, and there should be an option there to go for no filters at the top, so that just gets us back to chronological order. You'll see with the O, that being an observation, but of course you've also got memos. Lots of settings are using memos these days, and they're a quick way to get messages out to your relatives community without ending up with something that goes in the child's journal at the end. Right, aware of the time, I'm going to quickly come out of there, and I'm going to share over to the main. So I'm going over to my web browser now. In this case, it's Microsoft Edge. You might be on Chrome. It doesn't really matter what you're using for Tapestry. And I just want to show you where those flags are, where those different bits and pieces live. You can see I've got quite a lot of stuff up the top here enabled along the menu bar. When you go to the top right and find the the control panel, which is where all the juicy options are, you'll see that you've got features there, and that's where you can turn all these different pieces on and off. So if you want memos on but you can't see memos up here, go to features, and then you can turn these things on and off. And I would really suggest anything that you're definitely sure you don't want to use, turn it off. You know, get things as simple as possible within your Tapestry account. Okay, flags is not there, it's under settings, which pulls out all these other settings, and you'll see down here you've got flags, and if I click on there, you'll see that we can now, you can actually add your own flags, and there are some examples of settings using that in quite an interesting way, with their own sort of ideas of how you could mark, you know, how you could tag someone's observation. But you'll see under EYFS 2021 here that we've got, if I go, now these are all enabled, I believe. You can have reflections enabled or not enabled for these flags, which is an interesting thing to think about. I guess if you're considering using reflections at all, you want to enable them for the flags that you're using. I'll talk about reflections a little bit in a moment. But if I go to this one, the main one that you will want to use, you'll see that I can have it enabled, visible to relatives, which is not so controversial now. It's not age banned. You know, if something's to do with maths and it's to do with maths, I can't see that leading to many confrontational conversations with a parent, but you know, you never know. Reflections enabled, and then down here, if you do want those sub aspects on, those orange sub levels, you can do that. But lots of settings, whether they're using birth to 5 or not, choose not to do that, just to keep it to those 7 areas of learning. Make it simple. And the other thing to say about that is, you know, if you're going to use a flag system, you really need to communicate it clearly, strongly to your staff, so that everyone's on the same page, so that everyone is using the same system. Although having said that, there's nothing to stop you adding flags to observations as the person who kind of checks obs before they go anywhere. So that's where flags are. And again, you know, I've got a fair few here enabled, but turn them off. If you're not going to use them, turn off the ones that you're not going to use. And let's just have a quick look now. I fully appreciate that this is such a sort of whistle-stop tour. Where should we go first? Now, if I do go to reflections first, because it's worth thinking about what these are and what's the point of them. If I go to add a reflection, Tapestry actually give you, I'm not going to continue that one. It gives you a few pointers here. What are you thinking? Why are you thinking it? What are you going to do? It's quite broad, in fact, very broad. And really, you know, it's like a note-taking exercise. It's a way to, you know, I'm going to reflect on Christian's literacy. Okay, so this is for a specific child. It's for him. And because we're using flags with him, and I'm talking about literacy, I'm going to click there and I'm going to choose literacy. All right, so that's going to go into his records about literacy, and it's going to sit there. And when I am doing the tracking system, the areas of concern, it's going to get shown in there as well. So I'm going to say noticed once again Christian's verbal sentence construction as discussed previously. Okay, so it's just a reflection on what's been noticed, on something that is there, something that's being discussed with staff, and perhaps they're thinking about, you know, what they can do about this situation. The whole idea is that you're pinpointing areas of need for certain children, and implementing interventions or actions or whatever it is, provision to help children in certain areas progress. So you've got these options in here ready for discussion. Okay, so let's imagine I'm a teaching assistant and I'm just saying, look, I want to talk about this with someone again. I know it's come up before, but again today it's come up, and I think this is something that we need to push on further. And so this teaching assistant is putting this into the system, and I'm saying it's ready for discussion, visible to author and managers. So, you know, it's going to be visible to me as a teaching assistant and the teacher. It's not necessarily going to be visible to the other teaching assistants. It could be if I put it for all staff. Okay, but you've got that level of you know, privacy possibly between a member of staff and another member of staff about talking about a child, if that is appropriate for you. So it's a way, reflections are a way to really to formalize discussions that you would have anyway, perhaps. Okay, I know that lots of things are done for children in these settings. Lots of great decisions are made for children just in discussion, aren't they? We have this chat, we're talking about this, and you know, we're thinking about the best way forward, and all of that could go into here, but it's a way to formalize those discussions, and really you can think of that as a way to, you know, remember what you did. Anyway, like we said earlier, looking back on this 6 months later, it can be good to just have a few notes in here about what was noticed and what you did to help this child. Otherwise, it goes into the ether possibly, or it's written down on some paper over there, and you know, maybe, but you know, if that system works well for you, great. Lots of settings like the idea of sort of formalizing it and putting it into a digital system like this along with the child's records. So there's nothing to say you have to use this, but it's worth me, you know, demonstrating it to you as an option. I have heard from settings, you know, busy preschool. I remember a manager of busy preschool said she used this just as a sort of, you know, to-do list, a way to make notes throughout the week as to things that she needs to tackle in the next kind of staff meeting or with talking to other staff within one of those busy settings. So it can be used like that as well. I'm going to just save that reflection, and then that should go in. Now, reflections are not visible to relatives. I believe there's some different legislation in Australia, which means that they are always, you know, there for relatives. However, I guess if you were given a, you know, a data request, then the notes would have to all be made visible for that request. So, you know, it's not an excuse to be able to write lots of secret notes about someone's child. You know, everything is there to be certainly very, very professional in nature. So there's reflections if you want to use them. Now, under tracking, a few clicks to get going, you'll see under EYFS 2021, you've got areas of concern and you've got thoroughness. Now, thoroughness, let's just look at this quickly, is based on the flags. So if I look at the group view, you'll see down here, and it's not going to be particularly full of data here, but you can see the different children, and you can see that there are observations within different areas, and there are reflections for some of them in different areas. And of course, this allows you to get an overview. You've got your 7 areas to the left, and you've got an overview of how many observations are there in those different areas. Now, everybody is keen to point out that it's not a competition to have a certain number of observations for all of your children or certain children or whatever it might be, but we're all aware that certain children can get a little bit missed out throughout a busy term, and so it can be worth at times to look and perhaps see that certain children haven't had many observations, or perhaps see that certain areas haven't had many observations. But again, there's nothing saying you have to have an even number of observations across different areas, and certainly at the beginning of a year you're probably going to be focusing more on PSED rather than maths, whereas in a reception class probably there'll be more maths in the summer term than in the autumn term, as the children grow into their learning. So that can be useful, thoroughness. Back to tracking, back to here, EYFS 2021, and areas of concern. Now, you've got a group view, which is a way to just look at the group and see where they are. And you've got a guided view, which I'll come to second, which is about, again, sort of a more formal review process of where children are. It might be towards the end of each term that you look at the progress of children and go through this guided view. And lots of settings choose to work in that way, to have those in the past they were data points, weren't they? Data drops or something like that. Now it's a point where children's progress is reviewed. If I go to the group view, and the group view is more of a sort of overview of where a child is, and you'll see here, we've got a couple of children. We've got David Chambers here, who's on no concerns, and I believe the idea is that depending on your cohort of children, you're going to have lots of no concerns, and it's all about again, it's all about finding those areas where you need to focus. And so I can come in here, and who was that child earlier? Christian Robinson, I think, and I made a reflection there on did I do it on literacy? I think there we go. Perhaps it should have been in communication language. So if I go in here, I can add another reflection, but you'll see it's in the system. It's part of his records, and if you see, if I go to the timeline here, you can see that it records chronologically different points when we reviewed his progress, or somebody said there's a concern here. So you can go into the group view and say, hang on, I'm marking this as concerns, and I'm going to click. Okay, and just by clicking, it's now, I go to the timeline, you'll see it's registered that 17th of Jan. I recorded concerns. I could go in and say, actually, this is all sorted, no concerns. And again, that's going to be recording. In fact, it's blanked out the thing I did before, because you have one option of doing it once a day. So I think this is a pretty good way to have an overview of where children are. And if you were talking about where your whole class was in terms of their areas of development, bringing it up in this way could be a great way to talk through and see where they are. Looking at let's go back up, so tracking EYFS 2021. If I go to the guided view, and again, this is about more formally kind of reviewing their progress. Let's say I'm going to review these 6 children's progress today, because I haven't got time to do all of them. So I've chosen them. I'm going to go to next. and you'll see I can review different areas. I think you're more likely to review them all. I think most settings are more likely to review a child by child, but you might work in a different way. I'm going to review all areas for a child, then proceed to the next child. Okay, and then it puts me into this situation. You'll see 1 of 42 children and areas. So I've selected 6 children. There's 7 different areas, so that's 42. And I'm going to go through this and say, okay, as it says there's some notes on there about it. Is this an area of concern? Is it not? Review means actually I'm not totally sure, and kind of want to talk about this area a bit more with someone before we kind of say, well, we actually think we're okay here. And of course you may be saying, well, this was a concern, and it's not now. It's happily not. So I'm going to mark this one as no concerns, and then you'll see we move on to the next area. And again, for the most part, it's going to be about saying, hopefully, no concerns in that area, no concerns in that area. Whereas in literacy, okay, so we're still concerned here, and you'll see if you click concerns, it says, do you want to reflect on this? And so, of course, making a reflection is more about the notes that would be attached to that about what's going on in this area with this child. Okay, someone coming in a bit late there, but material is going to be available on the website. So you go through. So if I was to click on reflect, it will open a new tab, and it's going to pull in Abby Johnson's child, and you'll also see it's pulled in the flag literacy because I'm making a reflection on that area. I skipped it. I'm not going to. No reflection today. I'm going to just say that was a concern area. It's still a concern area, but I don't have anything extra to write about it. No concerns in maths. No concerns here. And no concerns there. Right, so then we've moved on to the next child. So again, this is the more formal review process about a child's progress. And you'll also see in here that if I can find one that's got observation, not sure I can because there aren't that many obs in here, but you'll see below there is an option here for supporting observations about, in this case, maths. And so if you've got observations that have been tagged with maths, they will appear here so that you can look at them. And again, the same with reflections. So it pulls out what it thinks are the relevant materials. And of course, that's all down to you using the flag system successfully. So, you know, if you've got lots of observations there and you haven't put flags on them, it kind of means it does mean that your system's gonna have quite a few holes in it, really. So if you're going to use flags, do make sure that you're using them, because you don't want loads of observations out there that are relevant but aren't being pulled into your tracking system.